Hello, folks. Today, I want to talk about something that I hope I haven't talked about before, unlike when I did a thing about the five aggregates, and I found out that like 4 months before I did a thing about the five aggregates. I don't think I've done this one before. But this is sort of a complicated one that you tell me if you want to hear more about this. I'm just going to kind of introduce it in this video and give you just a really brief overview of it because I think it's interesting. And if you want me to dig into it a little bit more, maybe I can do so in another video. It is Bodhidharma's one-mind precepts. Maybe, or maybe not, you are familiar with the Buddhist precepts, the 10 grave precepts, and I put them in my book Hardcore Zen, and I'm going to read you the version that's in the book Hardcore Zen just as a refresher course so you know what they are. Number 1, not to kill. Number 2, not to steal. Number 3, not to misuse sexuality is the normal version of it, or the most usual version of it. My teacher, Nishijima Roshi, gave it as not to desire too much. Number 4, not to lie. Number 5, not to cloud the mind with intoxicants. Number 6, not to criticize others. This one I prefer these days, the Kobanchino version, which is no speaking of past mistakes. So it's not just not criticizing others, but not criticizing yourself. Just forget about past mistakes. We could go into that, but that's the way it is. Number 7, not to be proud of yourself and slander others. 8, not to covet. 9, not to give way to anger. And 10, not to slander the 3 treasures. So that's a pretty standard version of the 10 grave precepts in Buddhism. There's 16 precepts that you take in a Jukai ceremony in which you kind of vow publicly to dedicate yourself to upholding the precepts. And these are the ones that people focus on more. The other 6 are more general and not as specific as these. These precepts grew out of a situation in which, when Buddha was alive, people would do things and somebody else in the Sangha would say, in the groups of following the Buddha would say, hey, what about that thing? And then Buddha would say whether it was right or wrong. There developed a thing called the Vinaya, which was hundreds and hundreds of these rules. When Buddha died, he said, don't worry about the minor rules, just keep the major ones. Then he died without saying which ones were the major ones. These 10 represent what Buddhists over the years have come down to deciding are the major ones rather than the minor ones. And there's a whole long history behind that we could go into later, but that's all you need to know for the moment. Okay? So, what I wanted to talk about is the Bodhidharma one-mind precepts. And I'm getting most of my information from this thing called Evolution of the Precepts, study material for the 2008 National Conference of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association, who used to do interesting things like this, but now kind of get sidetracked into other things. But maybe we'll talk about that later. Anyhow, this is their thing, and I will, if I remember, I'll put a link to where you can find this as a PDF online, if I can find the link. But this is real interesting and contains a lot of information, like more information than you'd ever want to know about the precepts. And here's what they say about the Bodhidharma one-mind precepts. Now, Bodhidharma is a guy who probably lived in the 5th or 6th century of the Common Era, and in China mostly, but he was an Indian Buddhist monk who came to China and is historically remembered as the person who brought the Zen form of Buddhism to China. Whether he really existed or whether there were several people whose legends kind of congealed into the one legend of Bodhidharma is a matter of historical dispute, but we can probably say that there was a Bodhidharma. Whether he did and said all the things he's supposed to have done and said is under dispute, and it is actually under dispute in the matter of these Bodhidharma one-mind precepts. Okay, so here's what we hear in this thingy about the Bodhidharma one-mind precepts. The history of the Bodhidharma precepts is complicated, and there are many different versions. They are not composed by Bodhidharma, but rather arose in Japan as part of the Tendai. That's a sect of Buddhism which is kind of esoteric and kind of interested in mystical ideas and kind of... It's an interesting form of Buddhism, and it's the form of Buddhism that Dogen studied before he studied Zen. And so Dogen's version of Zen is very influenced by Tendai Buddhism. It was established as part of the Tendai efforts to establish a new Vinaya, a new set of precepts. The earliest extant versions of the Bodhidharma one-mind precepts date from the mid-15th century, and they're written in Chinese, but they were probably composed in Japan, and this was the style in Japan, much as in the West, religious stuff was composed in Latin for a long time, even though people didn't speak Latin. Same thing in Japan. A lot of things were composed in Chinese, even though most people didn't really speak Chinese, but it was considered kind of the good language, the best language. And Japanese itself was sort of seen as low-class language, even by the Japanese. So that's why they were composed in Chinese. So let's read these precepts. So the first precept is usually given as not to kill, and the Bodhidharma one mind precept version of it is, self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the midst of eternal dharma, not to give rise to the view of stopping and extinction is called no killing of life precept. That is the version I heard when I first heard it. That's Kobun Chino's version. The version I put in my book was actually written by Bill Kwong. Bill Kwong was a guy from San Francisco Zen Center, and I think what happened when I put out this book, it was I couldn't find the Kobun Chino version at the time, so I found the Bill Kwong version, which is very similar, although a little different. I just noticed that it's a tiny bit different. Let me read you what I wrote in the book. Self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the everlasting Dharma, not giving rise to the notion of extinction is called the precept of not taking life. So, actually, I don't know. To be honest with you, just right now making this video, I'm going, oh, that's not the Bill Kwong version. I thought that was the Bill Kwong version, but it isn't. I'll just give them to you anyway. They're variations on the Kobun Chino version. I don't know how. It's been a long time since I wrote this book. I don't know how I came up with these, but they're close enough. So that is not to kill. The next one is not to steal, right? And the Kobun Chino version is, self-nature is mysteriously profound, unattainable dharma. Not to raise mind of attainable is called no stealing or robbing. Now the version I put in this book is, self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the dharma in which nothing can be obtained, not giving rise to the thought of obtaining is called the precept of not stealing. Actually, these versions are a little bit more clear, I think. I think the versions that I'm getting from this book from Kobun Chino are versions that he kind of spoke out loud, and then this version was a little bit more refined version of the Kobun Chino version. But let's continue. Not to misuse sexuality is number 3, or not to desire too much. This is the Bodhidharma version as originally written in Kobun Chino's book. Self-nature is mysteriously profound, truth of no attachment. Not to give birth of attaching loving is called no desiring, no wrong, no scattered desiring. And this is the version I put in my book. Self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the Dharma in which there is nothing to grasp, not giving rise to attachment is called the precept of not misusing sex. Interesting. Number 4, which is usually do not lie, is in the original Kobun Chino version. Self-nature is mysteriously profound, unexplainable dharma. Not to preach one word is called no illusory words. And what I put in here is, self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the inexplicable dharma, not speaking even a single word is called the precept of not telling lies. Interesting little variation there. Number 5 is, well, no selling of wine. Let's see, what do we call that? No drinking of wine is how it's usually given. And do not cloud the mind with intoxicants. It's a big favorite on this channel. I should memorize it all the way through, but I didn't. So don't do drugs. And the original Kobun Chino version of the Bodhidharma version is, self-nature is mysteriously profound, truth of original basic purity. Not to give birth of ignorance is called no selling wine, no drinking wine. And what did I put in here? Self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the intrinsically pure Dharma, not allowing the mind to become dark is called the precept of not dealing in intoxicating liquors. The precept changed over the years. The original precept was very clear, and it was don't drink, don't do intoxicants. And later in China, it was changed to don't sell wine or liquor. And this is because the Chinese monks believed that they needed a bit of alcohol to help them get through the harsh winters, because it makes your fingers feel a little warm when you drink alcohol and stuff like that. So That's what happened there. Number 6. So no speaking of the faults of others, or as Kobanchino put it, no speaking of past mistakes, or no dwelling on past mistakes. So, self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the midst of unmistakable truth, not to speak of past mistakes is called the precept of no speaking of past mistakes. And what I wrote in here is, this is interestingly different. Self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the faultless Dharma, not speaking of others' faults is called the precept of not criticizing others. So that one was always kind of interesting, because I remember Tim, when he first gave a lecture about that, when I was a little squeaker sitting in his class, he commented on the fact that all the others are kind of mystical, but this one is like, not to speak of past mistakes is called not to speak of past mistakes. So interesting there. Number 7, no praising yourself while abusing others. So the original Kobanchino version is, self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the midst of equality, in the midst of identical dharma, identity of truth, no speaking of self and others is called the precept of no praise or blame. Okay. And what I put in my book is, self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the sphere of equal dharma, not speaking of self and others is called the precept of not being proud of self and slandering others. Number 8 is usually given as do not covet or do not begrudge material things or teachings of the Dharma. And the original Kobanchino translation of the Bodhidharma version is, self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the midst of all-pervading truth, not to raise hoarding attaching on one form or any single form is called the no hoarding precept. Now remember, these are spoken out loud. And the version I have in this book is, self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the all-pervading true Dharma, not clinging to one form is called the precept of not coveting. Moving right along. Number 9 is don't give way to anger, and the Kobanchino version of the Bodhidharma version, the original one. Self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the midst of selfless truth, truth of selflessness, no measuring of oneself is called no being angry, or precept of no not being angry. Okay, remember he spoke these out loud. The one I have in the book, which, as I said, I'm not sure exactly where I got it from. Self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the Dharma of no self, not giving rise to the thought of self and others is called the precept of not giving way to anger. Actually, that one's a little bit more clear, I think, than Kobanchino's version. And number 10, everyone's favorite, don't slander the 3 treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Okay, here's the Kobanchino version. Self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the midst of one Dharma, in the midst of one great truth, not to give rise of mind of sentient being or Buddha being is called no abusing 3 treasures. Again, spoken out loud by a person who didn't speak English as his native language. Here's the version I put in my book. Self-nature is mysteriously profound. In the one Dharma, not giving rise to the thought of distinction between sentient beings and Buddhas is called the precept of not speaking falsely of the 3 treasures. That one's a little bit more clear. Wish I knew where I got it, but I don't have endnotes or anything in this book. So I just kind of wanted to throw those out there for you and let you know that they exist, because I think they're very interesting versions of the precepts which I've been working with in this book that I'm trying to write, and I kind of got stuck. Just before I came out here, I was working on the chapter on number 10, no abusing the 3 treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and just pounding my head against the keyboard and trying to figure out how to explain this to people who don't know what it means, and got stuck, and now I'm out here making a video. So I just wanted you to know that those exist, and if you're interested in hearing more about them, I can try to do videos about that, so leave a comment below and tell me if this is interesting or if this is boring and you don't care about it. But there are things to think about. So, for the time being, just kind of go, oh, that's weird, why does that precept say that? That's kind of what I did with them in the book Hardcore Zen. I just threw them out there and went along and talked about something else, because I just thought, I want to put these out there and let people know they exist. So, if you want to let people know I exist, no, that isn't a good transition. Anyway, if you want to donate to my existence, that's good. You can donate here on the links you're seeing below somewhere on the screen. That is how I make most of my living, and thank you, thank you, thank you, all the people who keep contributing to me, because that's how I'm able to buy toilet paper and cereal and things, and keep on living. And it's really been great to know so many people care. If you don't have money, or if you're having a hard time and you're struggling these days, don't give me any money. Just, take care of yourself first. But those of you who've got it and have been donating are really saving my life, literally. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye.